Hello and welcome to Bible Smack. Now, I'm doing this part of a series. I usually do my pledges. I'm going to skip that because it's kind of a part B, part two of a several part series. So, forgive me, but I'm going with a pledge from the previous video. Now, we're dealing with the issues of slavery and stuff. You got to watch the first video, then you can watch this one. Okay. But basically, from a New Testament Christian perspective, the North was very much hypocritical. We have to understand this. It's because the Union won the war that they get to push their propaganda for the rest of U.S. stinking history. Okay? And they can push these, misnomers, if not lies, or hiding of the facts and truth so that they can kind of go ahead with this agenda. And it pushes a large federalism, which is becoming a tyranny in our country right now. And all of it came from this root. What really went on? Well, the South would not have slaves if it was not for the North. What do I mean? The slave trade. Find me a Confederate slave ship. They did not have slave ships. They did not have slave ports. It was all the North working with the British, and I could also mention the Catholics. The Catholics were the ones that, like the Pope and them, started the African trade, the slave trade, back in the 1500s with the Papal Bull. Okay. But basically, Britain got into it, and then the Yankees started working with the British, and so they would take these slaves and sell them for huge amounts. By the way, another misnomer is that we're talking about 20% of the South owning slaves. The rest of the 80%, they were called rednecks. Okay, I'm related to a lot of them. But basically, so you had these rednecks that they were just part of that society, but only 20% was owning it. Well, anyhow, going back to the North, though, they would sell them, all these slaves. So a lot of, the South was considered, the richest area of the world at the time, second only to the Vatican. Okay. And basically, the problem is, though, is that it's in the stock of the slaves. So it wasn't actually, all money, but basically the North had huge amounts of revenue. Okay. And then they're going to start pushing the propaganda of abolition movement. Now, this is where it gets a little twisted because, yes, it was a good thing to say we need to get rid of slavery. That's awesome. That's great. But let's go kill people because they own slaves is an exaggeration. Okay. This is the problem. You have, they bought 300,000 slaves, and then they have 3 to 400,000 people get killed. Okay. So, you got to weigh these things out. All right. The genocide that went on was easy because they had better technology, they had better rifles, they had a system of telegraphs. The South had none of these. And then they were just way overmatched as far as population goes. Okay, masses and masses and masses of Yankees, maybe at least 2 to 1. Okay, so you just had these massive armies. A lot of them were actually abusing a system when it came to the Irish. Okay, the Irish came over in potato famine. They were dirt poor. And when I talk about dirt poor, you have to understand something. The Irish, even though they were technically free, were at the very bottom of Yankee society, and they treated them so bad that even I think was it George Washington Carver? No, Frederick Douglass. Frederick Douglass said that they were being treated worse. The Irish were being treated worse than the black slaves. Okay. So basically, the Yankees would, mistreat the bottom of their society horribly, okay, and treat them worse. Then They were the ones who started the whole system so they could get rich by selling slaves over to the South. Then, guess what? They didn't really abolish slavery in the North. There were several slave states in the North, and I believe that I think they still had them, okay, for, a couple decades after the war. So, this is a lot of hypocrisy, and on top of it all, the big deal with the South was just that, like, they wanted to do it legally, rightfully, and kind of say, all right, we want this, we want that, and if the problem needs to be solved, it needs to be solved from the inside. Now, I do want to be fair, though. There is a lot of evil going on in the South. I mean, we could obviously see it, but, like, I think there's one of your Illuminati groups. There's a couple of Illuminati groups kind of running around with this whole situation, okay? But one of them was, I think it was the Knights of the Golden Circle. Okay, if I'm wrong, well, hey. But it was I think it was the Knights of the Golden Circle. And they loved the slave system, and they wanted to get the West to become, pro-slavery, and then they were going to join forces with Mexico. They wanted to get the South to move and join forces with Mexico, obviously as a pro-Catholic group. Okay. So, this is kind of what their plan was. At the same time, the North wanted to take over too, and the North won, so the North did take over. Okay, and we'll see that in the next episode. But so it was kind of like this. The Confederacy was all about like, hey, we got powers that are separated and stuff like that. It's a state-to-state issue. And a lot of this gets exaggerated. Not exaggerated. It escalates, okay, because down south in Florida, Florida's a Catholic state. The Jesuits wanted to destroy the Protestants. And I talked about this in an earlier video about how they did in the French and Indian War, getting the Indians to turn on them. Well, so in Florida, in the early 1700s, they did have a instance where there were some inquisitions of Protestants and stuff like that in the early 1700s. Then they start to gather these villages together, combining some black Muslims, ex-slaves and stuff like that. Some of them were coming in, and some of them were, from America and stuff like that, like Haiti or something. But anyhow, you had these black Muslims mixing in with the Native Americans, and I think the Jesuits were influencing them and saying, yeah, you look at these guys, look at what they're doing, da-da-da, you got to kill the slave owners. So you had these Gullah Wars go on for, little skirmishes and battles over the years, and a lot of people hide the blackness of it. They kind of just say, oh, those are Indians, but, there were some other things going on, and I think it was Jesuit enforced. But what happens as a result of that? Well, the South gets freaked out, and they start cracking down harder, okay? So you got to see that as a factor. Well, anyhow, the New Testament Christianity, though, does not support slavery, and you can see some of that in several factors. One is the simple fact that the Anabaptists, okay, they were real deal. The Anabaptists banned slavery in their congregations, okay. Of course, they did this in the North, but guess what? They even did in Virginia, okay. The Anabaptists would not let members own slaves, okay, or you get kicked out of the church. Okay, that's serious. Because they believe in freedom, and they were enslaved in Europe in the Inquisition. Okay, so the real deal, they were going with that. And then, what religion do the black slaves take up? New Testament Christianity. Mostly Baptist and stuff like that. Now, Baptist in the mainstream, though, like the quote-unquote Southern Baptist, the problem that goes on there is that you have a lot of that dominated in the middle of the 1700s by Calvinism. And Calvinism looks at the Old Testament, and they want to kind of put some of the Old Testament and mix it with the New. Problem with that is, in this situation, that they start getting this idea of justifying slavery, which is not biblical. Okay, number one, we're not Israel. Okay, and we're not under the law. All right, and you can check my series on New Testament religion finding the way. But going back to it, so the blacks did take up the true faith, New Testament Christianity, more than any other type of Protestantism. And then, so when we look at this, the true faith would have stayed away from this crap. The Calvinism was stupid, okay? But they weren't plotting evil and stuff like that. Things you got to remember is that, unlike South America and these other Catholic nations that just ripped everything apart, or Haiti, they got them so mad that the slaves rebelled and just killed off all the French, okay? Basically, instead of all that, what do you have? Well, we have, instead of like a massive genocide and stuff of the black slaves, you went from 300,000 to 4 million. They reproduced, they were well fed. It was a successful system because they fed them well and did good with it, okay? So the problem was it was too successful. It was the wrong thing to do, and they were really good at it. But basically, so they were well fed. Crimes, you go to these state capitals, okay? Go to the state capitals and start looking up the history in their law books, okay? And look at the actual court histories and the court cases. And in there you will find several instances where whites were prosecuted when they did crimes to Africans, black slaves, stuff like that. Now, were there evil people in the system? Yeah. There may have been instances where, the justice was done wrong, okay? And there were probably lots of instances, because slavery is a bad institution, like if you're an alcoholic and you own slaves, that's not a good combo, okay? And, there's also instances of like, so-and-so owns some, female slaves, and so, they're taking advantage or whatever. That would be a mix, though, because sometimes the girls might want that higher status that the master has. But also, there are many times the master's just, obviously taking advantage of the situation, okay? And really I think they would probably be guilty on both ends anyway. You don't want to take advantage of a woman. But basically, going back to it, so the society itself, though, as a standard, okay, man is evil, but as a standard, they did hold standards to say, yeah, you should not do these things to these people, okay? You see a lot of instances, like in a lot of the Arabic nations, where, the more hardcore ones, where it seems like they treat, women being raped as okay, they just don't, okay? It wasn't at that level. Okay, that was evil. That was evil to to Southern society. Okay. Now, of course, when we talk about the oppression of the North, there was instances of rape and stuff from the Union coming down, and they raped white girls and black girls alike in the South. Okay, they would burn and destroy the territory. And this led to the fact that the Confederate Army was not just a white army. But as early as possible, the blacks were all behind, I shouldn't say all behind, what am I thinking? But there were, just very powerful armies of black Confederates, okay? And they fought incredibly hard. Why? Because the North is not feeding them. The North is not taking care of them. The North is wanting to destroy their home, okay? The North is raping their kids, okay? The North is coming out and doing all this kind of evil. And, many families, even though it was, quote-unquote, injustice, many families did get close in this situation, okay? They were the same, they had become the same American culture, all right? And so when they're coming down, they're saying, we're going to burn down everything, and you're like, okay, so I worked all my life to make this great plantation, make this great society and stuff, and you're going to destroy it and saying that that's setting you free. Free what? Free to run away somewhere, okay? Because they didn't really get. You got to be honest here, okay? African American, Black America did not get a good footing because of the Civil War. It got worse. It got horrible, okay? So the blacks, Confederate Army, they took on the North as hard as they could. Okay, I read some incredible stories about that. But anyhow, and I think I've talked earlier about this was for them a states' rights issue. It was the Union versus states' rights, and that's why today, as all these weird changes went on this year, across the nation, they took down the Confederate flag, and the next day put up the rainbow flag. Rainbow flag was based off the injustice of slamming the 10th Amendment. Confederacy fought under the auspices of the 10th Amendment. Okay? One day, and they do that. Okay, there's connections to all these things. So, um, this is kind of the heart of what's going on there. Um, and I think I've covered about everything as far as it goes for this. Obviously, it's just a huge topic, lots of different things. Um, obviously, you got to say that uh, the blacks have been vindicated as the victims of that whole story. Um, but to tell the truth, the North was not justified in their treatment of the South and continued treatment of the South. And that's been one of our biggest problems. And they use this as manipulation. Okay? They use this as manipulation to further do more evil. Okay? And our society today, when it comes to issues of racism, it was really good just a few years ago, and it's really getting worse now. But the continued fact is that racism is more accepted against Southern white people than any other group. I don't justify that system. I don't justify a lot of the things that they did. My historical roots are here in Kentucky, and Kentucky was not I think it had the right idea. Okay, it was not for the slave system. It was neutral during the war because it did not justify what happened to the South, and it did not justify what happened to the black people. Okay, and of course, there's lots of people in the middle. In my city, a lot of people worked in the Underground Railroad trying to get the black people their freedom. So, that's a good thing. And there were Confederates. You had both. I mean, you had like the president of the Union, Abraham Lincoln, and the president of the Confederacy, Jefferson Davis, all here in my state. Yeah. But anyway, I guess we'll go ahead and just conclude that as far as American history from a New Testament Christian perspective.